Everyone's ready? Okay, we can start. So, first of all, thank you for inviting us tonight to this meetup. I'm Agis, along with Katerina. We are going to talk about how we made a legacy app accessible. What we did right, what we did wrong, many things, and what we learned along the way. So we currently both work at Wire. It's a secure communication platform, and this is going to be the agenda for tonight. First of all, we are going to talk about the process of making a plan to tackle the project of making a legacy app accessible. Then we are going to separate the talk in 3 areas: colors and contrast, dynamic type, and voiceover. Then we are going to talk about how we tackle the problems that they arise in each of one of those 3 areas, the lessons that we learned in each of those areas, and the tools that helped us to make our app accessible. So, how the project started. We got a review from one of our clients, an accessibility review. They found a couple of issues that we needed to take care on and fix. And yeah, initially, because of the scope of the project, our initial reaction was something like this. Yep, one of my favorite movies, by the way, Home Alone. But we took a step back and
we understood that we need to make our own research to understand that we have enough knowledge about accessibility and that we don't miss anything important. So we are starting with reading Apple guidelines, checking tools, books, and also having the review from our client. We came up with a plan, and it was like this. So we defined 3 areas that we would like to and we need to work with. It's dynamic type, colors and contrast, and voiceover. Now we will talk more about all of these areas.
So, we start with dynamic type. We had a couple of issues. First of all, dynamic type was partially implemented throughout the app. So in a couple of screens it would work, in other screens it would not work. So that was kind of problematic. The second thing was that dynamic type was implemented in a different way in many parts of the app, different ways of handling fonts and so on. So that was also problematic for us. The third problem was that we had to support dynamic type based on our current system of how we handle fonts. And it's kind of an old system and it's kind of a complicated one. So that was another problem that we had to take care of. And the fourth one is that we had to make sure that dynamic type works and looks great in all languages, but especially English and German. So regarding the fourth one, imagine having to deal with long German words in all of content size category changes and sizes. So yeah, kind of a tough one. So this is part of our current implementation regarding fonts. So we had like a font size, we have a text style, and so on. So that's how we define our fonts. And this is not just it. We had a couple of extensions and other things that make the current implementation kind of complicated and really hard to work with. But we had to come up with a solution that didn't require us to refactor our whole font scheme code, because that would require a lot of work and a lot of time. So we came up with using not generics, but protocols. We came up with a protocol. So this method is called where the preferred size category changes. After that, we created 2 extensions for UI view and UI view controller to call this redraw font method whenever we change the user changes the content size category, as you can see. And the third part is to call this redraw all fonts method into our root view controller. So every time someone changes the size of the text, we get informed and we present the correct text size. But you may ask, what happens with buttons, labels? What do you do with those things? For those things, we created base classes such as dynamic font button and later dynamic font label. We conform to dynamic type capable. We pass a font spec to the title label in this case, and every time we change the size of this label, it automatically updates. So as soon as we initialize this label with a font spec, it updates automatically, which is pretty cool. The same thing happens with dynamic font button. This is also one of our newest base classes, where we conform to dynamic type capable, and then again the same thing, we update the font size. So may sound like a few things, but we learned a lot of things through this process. One of those things were learning to work along with the constraints that you may have can be a powerful tool, and that applies to the entire accessibility project. We had like a lot of constraints, mostly time constraints and people working on the project. So initially we were the only two working on the project, so we had to figure out a way to not refactor the entire code base, but also come up with a solution that fixes the issue that came up from the client. So our solution was like the best of both worlds. We still have to refactor our code sometime in the future, but at the same time, we came up with something that is really well thought out. The second thing is that if you know, most of the tests, most of the big projects, they also have like a test suite, and based on the major and big changes that we made, we had like an impact on our test suite. So we had to make changes there. We had to change base classes. And so if you are planning on making those kind of changes into your own project, make sure to first of all have like a test suite that you can verify your changes and nothing breaks. We broke a lot of things, but we fixed them. Yeah, so that's the takeaway from that one. The second area that I would like to talk about is colors and contrast. And this is one of the areas that we spend most of the time on, mostly because we had to make a lot of changes in a lot of places. Again, working with an old system and trying to come up with a new one to replace the old system. So the problems that we had here was like four main ones. So contrast was failing in many places throughout the app, and that was one of the biggest issues. The second thing was from our engineering perspective, we didn't have a defined color palette to work with, and also we were using a custom old method to switch between light and dark mode. So that adds up to the problems that we had to deal with. The third thing, and another important one, was that we didn't have a defined way to set colors for different UI elements and their state. So we would set the colors for buttons, styles, whatever the UI element is, in a different way. And the fourth one is a redesign with a question mark, which I'm planning to talk more about a bit later. So contrast was failing in many places throughout the app. That was one of the biggest user-facing issues. It was happening in a lot of places, especially in places where we had small text or blurry background. Blurry background, such as this one. So as you can imagine, it's really hard to read text and interact with text when the background is blurry and you cannot control the color value. So that led us to our second problem and got us thinking, how can we start working on colors and contrast? Where do you start? What you decide to pick on first? So our second problem was that we didn't have a defined color palette. We had a color palette, but it wasn't constructed in a way that it will help us with our accessibility goals. And actually, we didn't have kind of a source of truth. Many know this phrase from SwiftUI, but we didn't have a source of truth when it comes to our colors. So this is a big problem, like a big endeavor, how we are going to set the colors and how we are going to set our color scheme is going to play a big role on how we implement other things such as styles later on. So we used something called semantic colors. So for people who are not familiar with semantic colors, is a way of naming colors based on how they are used as opposed to their hue or color. And our naming convention was usage, content, and after that state. But before I can show you our semantic colors file, let's take a step back and think about colors first. So regarding colors, we got our color palette or color values from our designers, and we created colors.exe assets file. This file now rarely gets touched because all of the color values are there, so we don't have to touch it anymore. One of the benefits of having this kind of file is the visual aspect. You can see all of the colors, but you may ask, how can you use them with code? So as a second step, we used a tool called SwiftGen. Many of you may be familiar with the tool, and we were able to generate all of the colors in code. So it's way easier to work with, and the tool did all of the tedious work for us. Well, as a third step, we had to create a new initializer for UI color, taking color assets as parameters based on if we are using dark or light mode. And then we come up to the semantic colors. This is part of the semantic colors files. As you can see, this is all the colors related to the button, and also you can also here see the naming convention. So now you can say, okay, you have the colors, you are done, that's it, this is a way of implementing, and you can go ahead and implement everything you want, and that's life. Well, we had another issue that we had to deal with. Themable was our previous way of implementing colors, and user interface style was the new way that we wanted to implement colors. And the thing is that Themable was even older than UI user interface style when Apple released their way, or their light and dark mode. So yeah, Wire is kind of an old product. So an example of how Themable worked is again a protocol, and this is part of the definition. So I can give you an example here where in many cases like models, when you would want to switch from light to dark mode, you will have to dismiss the view and then bring back the view again so you can see the changes happen in real time. That doesn't happen with UI user interface style, so that's one of the main kind of differences. So we had two different systems working in two different ways in parallel, and yeah, before saying anything, I can say that this made our designers really confused, because some of the elements would change the color based on light and dark mode, some of the elements would not, because they were in model, so we didn't have the chance to work on those screens just yet. And we would have designers coming and say, oh, this element doesn't work, or this doesn't change, or we have this kind of problem. And trying to explain them that we have two different systems was confusing for them, of course, and kind of confusing for us as well, because we couldn't like communicate well. Well, now a question for you. We have all of these kind of elements. Does anyone know what all of those elements have in common? Any guesses? The states. Every one of those elements have different states, such as highlighted, selected, enabled, or not. So now we land into our third problem, which is we didn't have a defined way to set colors for different elements and states. And here I would like to mention, if anyone wants to take a look at the code and not part of the code, everything is open source on GitHub, so you can go ahead there and take a look at the entire thing. Initially we had different classes implementing and setting colors in a different way, like icon button, icon style, whatever that may be. And that was pretty confusing and unproductive, because if you decide, okay, I'm going to create a new button or I'm going to create a new class, which way are you going to set the color? It's kind of confusing, and yeah, made us feel something like this, trying to figure out which is the correct way and so on. So again, we had to take a step back and think, okay, we need to find like a common way of setting colors and setting the styles for those elements. So again, we used a protocol where the implementation should update the style of the UI element based on its state. And from there, it was pretty straightforward to create different kind of styles, such as button style, where as you can see, we have normal state colors, highlighted state colors, and selected state colors, and we set the colors like that. Another case can be switch style, and how we set the colors there. For switch style, we went a step further and we created a class where you can like initialize the switch with a style as soon as you create it. Now I want to take a moment and mention two small things that we found that may help you on your journey of making your app more accessible and working with color. So one thing should be border colors are not dynamically updating for dark mode. So if you want to do something like that, you have to use trait collection did change and update the color there. And the second thing is that applying a tint color for images and icons is also something that many people are not kind of aware of. So to do that, you have to set the rendering to template, as we do in set template icon method, and then set the tint color for that image or icon. Huge thank you to Antoine, because we were able to learn a lot from his blog and improve our own code. And the fourth thing that I want to talk about is kind of a redesign with a question mark. So how that happened. Oh, sorry. These are some of the screens that we had in Figma. And initially the project started as like quick wins, something that we can fix easily and then push out and all of that. So one day we had a conversation with one of the designers after we made the initial planning for the project. And she said that no, the screens need to look exactly like they look on Figma. So that messed up our entire planning, and we learned a lot of lessons. Any idea what the first lesson is? Any guesses? Communicate early and often. Communicate early and often with your peers, with your designers, with your product managers. Show your work, build prototypes, and as a lesson, it's better to over-communicate than under-communicate. The second lesson that we learned the hard way here is extend instead of replacing existing code. So I can give you an example here. You may have a view, like a footer view, and you change the color for that view, but you use that view in many different places across the app. That leads to changes in a ton of screens. In our case, changes to a lot of snapshots. Also leads to big pull requests, 300 and more files. And two systems, again, working in parallel. That doesn't look good, and it doesn't work well when other people want to review your work. So what should we do instead? Like extend the code, create new classes, or adapt or create new initializers. What I mean by creating new classes, for example, in this case, we wanted to override is selected and is highlighted, but on icon button is being used in many different places across the project. But we were just working on a specific screen and we wanted to make a change there. So instead of going to icon button and make the change there and apply that change to everything across the app, we created a new class and we overrided those two properties. That can be helpful because it will keep your changes to the minimum. Second thing is adopt or create new initializers. This is the first initializer that we had for the dynamic font label. As you can see, it takes a color and a variant as a parameter, but we had to change that and instead use color. But we didn't delete the previous initializer and replace it with that. We created this new one because, again, we didn't want to break what worked already. So another interesting lesson, I guess, that I would like to share is keep track of your future changes that you need to make. As you work on the project, you may realize, oh, I need to change that, or I need in the future to make this refactor or whatnot. So it's going to be easier if you keep a log. This is my log as an example. I have like a text file where I keep all of those stuff in changes that you need to make in the future. Then you can create tickets and inform the team that we need to make those things. So I found that to be really valuable. So now my colleague is going to talk about all of the work we did over at VoiceOver.
Yep. So the third area we were working on, and actually still work, it's VoiceOver. VoiceOver is a screen reader that makes it possible to use iPhone, iPad if the user cannot see the screen. And we had a few issues with VoiceOver as well. One of them, that app has never been tested actually by VoiceOver, and some accessibility property were implemented randomly. Some of the elements didn't explain their purpose. For example, that this element is heading or is editable. Some elements didn't have a translation and only has an English version, since we have many clients from different countries and they use their localization. So this was one of the critical bugs. And keyboard traps. Keyboard trap means that a user couldn't change the focus to another element, and application doesn't provide any navigation alternatives. We started with to making testing and collecting the correct strings together with the design team and our copywriter. On this screen you see two examples how we did it. Actually, the list was very big and we cover all the elements, all the screens. It was a huge manual work, but at the end it was very useful. In the meanwhile, we were checking application how far away we are from the standards. And one of the standards is WCAG. It's a guideline, web content accessibility guideline. This standard applies to both web pages and mobile application. And the purpose of the standard is defined how to make content more accessible for people with disabilities. So there are three levels. 1A, it's basic standard, 2A and 3A, it's kind of a gold standard. Also, another guidelines was useful from Apple. I would recommend for someone who is working with accessibility or will work. Next, we would like to talk about tips and tricks. It was a journey for a couple of months to work with the voiceover, so we have something that we would like to share. I would like to start with some fundamentals. It's the most common accessibility properties is accessible element, indicate whether element is accessible or not. Accessibility label, it's localized strings that identify accessibility element. Accessibility hint, also localized string, contains the brief description of the result of performing an action on the accessibility element and accessibility traits. Provide the necessary hints. Depending on the context, hints are not always necessary. Sometimes accessibility label already contains enough information. And for example, if you feel or see that accessibility labels already has too much content, it makes sense to move it to the hint. Group accessibility items. This will decrease the amount of swiping through elements on the screen and make it less heavy. On this slide, you can see three examples how we grouped a few UI elements, and for voiceover, it was only one accessible element. Large containers. Sometimes if you have a screen where there are a lot of small view, it's very hard for blind people or for people with the vision impaired to find the necessary element, and it's helpful for them to move them to some containers. Commas create coherency. In this slide, I would like to show you example and what magic commas can give. I don't know if it's yes, exactly the moment when I wanted to make some. So if you have a big string in the text, it's important to make a comma. Then voiceover will be sound as a human, and it will be more easy to hear. Agis, I can guess.
Yes.
Try to.
Do we need voice from?
Let's try to with laptop, if it will be.
You can try.
Conversation options. Guests. On. Services. On. Read receipts. On. Button.
So it's as a human. And this,
Conversation options. Guests. On services. On read receipts. On. Button.
yes. This is what magic commas can make. Add alternative text to images. If you have images on your screen and you want to make them accessible, it's better to put alternative text, otherwise VoiceOver will read them as image. Notifications. You might need to inform a user about some major UI changes, and in this case, UI accessibility notifications can help. I would put the three most common type of notifications: an announcement, layout changed, and a screen changed. When you have some major portion of changes on your screen, it makes sense to use screen changed. If some of the element appearing or disappearing, makes sense to use layout changed. And for example, if some element is going to stay briefly on the screen, then it's better to use announcement. Testing. I put here two different ways. Sometimes you need to test VoiceOver just without voice and to see how VoiceOver navigates through the application. This you can mute VoiceOver with a double tap with 3 fingers. You can use a screen curtain if you want to test with the voice and don't see anything on your screen. This you can do the magic triple tap with 3 fingers on your screen and you will have the curtains. Ideas and tools. We were using for testing Accessibility Inspector and Reveal. Accessibility Inspector, this is a part of Xcode. It's free and actually we found it's very useful. Reveal is external tool for team. It's not for free, but from our experience, we can say that Accessibility Inspector is enough for the basic thing. And of course, there are many other tools. Make accessibility part of the process. This will create consistency and save your time in a long run. As an example, it can be a checklist when if you create or your colleagues create a new UI element or do some refactoring, it's better to have something that you can check what you should make sure that you don't break or still support everything related to accessibility. Another idea is add to the onboarding process, then new colleagues will know how to work with the UI elements. Sharing knowledge with the team. It can make sure that everyone is on the same page and can increase the bonding of the team. And one of the important slides.
We have one more thing. It wouldn't be like a presentation about Apple platforms without this slide. So we would like to thank everyone who worked tirelessly on this project on the last couple of months, from the designers, QA folks, product managers over at Wire, and of course our App Unite colleagues. It's been a big project, but with the help of everyone involved, we were able to make our product accessible to everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions or want to talk accessibility afterwards, we are more than happy to.
I wanted to ask, because you mentioned snapshots, is there any other way you make sure the accessibility stays?
Regarding the UI,
Yeah.
no, we mainly use a snapshot test for that, and it was a pain at the start to make sure we don't break everything, yeah. But mainly, we want to introduce like UI tests at some point, like testing the flows, because sometimes you cannot do that with snapshot tests, but not yet.
Got a question.
Yep.
At a certain point you mentioned you wanted to prevent like large PRs and just create an additional initializer instead of rewriting one.
Yep.
Did you also have like techniques or like deprecations or something like to prevent keeping using the old one?
The old one? Not yet, actually, because we were the only like 2 people, like 3 people working on that, so it wasn't such like a necessity to do so. But since you saw the list already, we have a lot of things that we need to like either deprecate or get rid entirely. But we wanted, so we didn't want to make changes and those changes to apply to the entire app because of the 2 ways of working with color, and also the PRs are going to be huge.
Yeah.
No one would want to review those, so we had to stay focused on like screen by screen basis. So that was the main like motivator.
And gracefully, yeah. And deprecating the other one results in 100 warnings.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask what made Wire think that accessibility is important enough to commit quite a lot of work in achieving that. Do you have like huge percentage of the end users that require this kind of features, or was it something else?
Yes, it came from 2 sides actually. The first one was that we got that review, and that was like our initial kind of motivation for the project. But as like more and more people started like joining the project, they saw how important it is and that we need to like fix all of those things and even like other issues that we found for all people, mostly because it's the right thing to do together.
And I would also add that it's since we received a review from our customers, so it was from their side also push, let's to say like this. And I'm not sure for 100%, but in Germany, our design team gave a presentation that there should be a law, or there will be soon, that they will be more restricted with applications. So Wire decided to start now when we don't have the strict law, but who knows.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you.